The blade pierced through her chest with surgical precision, but Frieren felt nothing. Not the cold steel, not the warm blood trickling down her robes, not even the triumphant smile spreading across her opponent's face. She had felt this exact wound 847 times before, in 847 different battles, across 847 different centuries. The Demon Lord's lieutenant stepped back, expecting to watch the legendary mage crumble to dust. Instead, Frieren sighed. "You mortals always aim for the heart," she murmured, pulling the sword from her chest with casual indifference. The wound sealed itself instantly, leaving only a tear in her white robes. After 1,000 years, you'd think someone would try something original. The demon's eyes widened in horror as realization dawned. This wasn't just any elf mage. This was her, the one who had walked beside heroes when the world was young, who had seen empires rise and fall like seasonal flowers, who had mastered magic that predated written history itself. But what the demon could and see what no one could see was the weight pressing down on Frieren's shoulders. Not the weight of responsibility or burden, but something far more crushing, the weight of too much time. She dispatched the demon with a flick of her wrist, a spell so ancient that speaking its name would turn mortal tongues to ash. As the creature dissolved into shadow, Frieren found herself alone again in the crumbling tower that had once been her sanctuary. The silence wrapped around her like an old, familiar coat. Time moved differently for elves. What felt like a brief conversation to her could span a human's entire childhood. She had learned this lesson the hard way, watching countless companions age and wither while she remained unchanged. Heroes who had called her friend became legends, then myths, then forgotten whispers and dusty tones. The cruelest part wasn't watching them die, it was watching them fade from memory. Frieren walked to the tower's window, gazing out at a world that had transformed beyond recognition. The great forest where she had once gathered herbs with a young human girl named Sira now lay buried beneath a sprawling metropolis. The mountain where she had shared her first kiss with a brave knight named Aldrich had been carved into a marble quarry. Even the stars seemed different now, though she knew it was only her perception that had changed. She remembered the exact moment she realized her curse. It was 1,247 years ago, during the festival of the Eternal Flame. She had been sitting in a tavern, sharing stories with a group of young adventurers who hung on her every word. One of them, a bright-eyed mage named Elias, had asked her about her greatest teacher, Master Cornelius. She had answered without thinking, "He taught me advanced transmutation theory when I was just 70 years old." The table had fallen silent. Elias had leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Master Cornelius, the legendary archmage who founded the Academy of Eternal Arts, he died 600 years ago." That was when it hit her. To these young humans, her casual reminiscence was ancient history. She wasn't sharing memories, she was reciting from a history book they had never read. But here's what truly broke her, she could barely remember Cornelius's face. Time had a way of blurring even the most precious memories. The sound of her mother's laughter had become an echo of an echo. Her father's bedtime stories had merged into a single, formless narrative. Even the faces of her closest friends had become composites, features borrowed from strangers she had met along the way. She had lived too long to remember clearly, but not long enough to forget completely. The tower shuddered as another group of adventurers broke through the lower defenses. Frieren could hear their excited chatter echoing up the stone stairs, young voices full of hope and determination, speaking of glory and treasure and the legendary mage who supposedly dwelt at the tower's peak. They had no idea they were climbing toward their deaths, not because she was evil, but because she was tired. So unimaginably tired that even the simple act of restraining her power required conscious effort. In her younger days, a mere 5 centuries ago, she had been careful to match her opponent's strength, to give them sporting chances, to teach them lessons in humility rather than obliterate them entirely. Now, she sometimes forgot to hold back. The first adventurer burst through her chamber door with his sword raised high, shouting a battle cry that would have been inspiring if she hadn't heard variations of it for the past millennium. He was young, perhaps 20, with the kind of determined expression that reminded her of someone she had once known. "Frieren the Eternal," he declared, "I challenge you to single combat." She wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in over 300 years. She asked the question, "What year is it?" The young warrior blinked, thrown off by the unexpected query. "It's It's 2847 of the new calendar, my lady. Frieren felt something crack inside her chest, not physically, but deeper, more permanent. The new calendar had been established to commemorate the end of the Age of Demons, a war she had fought impersonally. To her, it felt like yesterday. To this boy, it was ancient history. And what, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, is your name? I am Sir Gareth of the Northern Reaches, he proclaimed, though his confidence was beginning to waver. I seek the legendary Grimoire of Infinite Moons. The book he sought was sitting on her desk, no more than 10 feet away. She had written it herself during a particularly boring winter, never imagining that anyone would consider it legendary. But that was the problem with living too long. Everything you did casually became mythical to someone else. Sir Gareth, she said, testing the name on her tongue. It felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. Tell me about your village. This was not going according to the young knight's plan. He had prepared for battle, for tests of worthiness, for riddling contest with an ancient and cryptic sage. He had not prepared for small talk. My village, he stammered. Well, it's small. We have a wheat mill, and a blacksmith, and Mrs. Elderwood makes the finest apple pies in 3 kingdoms. As he spoke, Frieren saw something that made her heart stop. Hanging from his belt, worn smooth by countless touches, was a wooden charm. A simple thing, carved in the shape of a crescent moon. She had made that charm 1,200 years ago, for a little girl who had been afraid of the dark. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Garrett's hand moved instinctively to the charm. It's been in my family for generations. My grandmother said it was blessed by a great mage who once saved our village from shadow demons. The room spun around her. The little girl Sira, her name had been Sira, had grown up, married, had children, died, and been forgotten by everyone except this one small charm passed down through 40 generations of her descendants. And here was her great-great-great-great-grandson, seeking to claim a book from the very mage who had blessed his family's protective charm. Time wasn't linear for Frieren. It was a prison, and she was serving a life sentence. But as she looked at young Gareth, still clutching his sword despite the growing confusion on his face, she felt something stir in her chest. Not hope, she had learned not to trust hope, but something smaller and more fragile. Curiosity. Sir Gareth, she said finally, would you like some tea? I have a very long story to tell you, and I suspect you have a very short time to hear it. For the first time in 3 centuries, Frieren smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was real, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough to start again.